All right, welcome to Behind the Blue Line, a podcast where I explore the human side of policing. Thank you for joining me again. I'm Jason Somerville, and I was a Queensland police officer for 14 years. And as well as that, I spent 2 years working undercover. Now, you've been listening to the stories of Michael Bates, my alter ego, of my time undercover. Well, I've decided that it's time we heard from other cops, other undercover cops, and other general policing to tell their stories. Today, I'm chatting with Paul Milone, who was rather a former police officer and a former undercover police officer based in the Omaha Police Force in Nebraska, the USA, rather. He's also a published author of his book, Ram 1. Good afternoon there, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing great, Jason. How about yourself?
Mate, I am fantastic. For anyone watching and listening, it's 7:30 in the morning here and 4:30 on yesterday in the States. So I'm happy to be awake. I'll put it that way. Look, thanks for agreeing to join the podcast and for agreeing to chat about your general policing and your undercover work. Now, just before we go any further, your book, tell us a little bit about that and where people can find it.
Yeah, the book's titled Ram 1. You can find it on Amazon, and basically it's just a book about my career working undercover and being on the SWAT team and the normal stuff that cops do before you get to those positions. Kind of had a crazy career, and I figured I'd put it on paper.
Sounds good. I think most cops have a crazy career, if we're being honest. How long were you in the police for?
23 years full time. I currently went back, and I've been part time for about a year working at the training academy and the firearms range.
Okay. So, how old were you when you joined?
I was 29 when I went through the academy.
Okay. So you worked prior to becoming a police officer. You had an understanding of what life was like.
Yeah, which I think makes way better cops than a 21-year-old who doesn't have an understanding about life and takes those calls trying to tell people how to lead their lives when they really don't know how to lead their own.
Yeah, yeah, guilty. Because that's what it was like as a 21-year-old going out and talking to some 45-year-old who they're going, "Well, what do you know, son?" You're right. Yeah, this is very true. All right, so you're currently going back part time. What does that involve?
I've been lucky enough to get to go out to the training academy and work with new recruits,
Yep.
and I took the career that I had and I added that to the training that we do out there to try to give them the most realistic scenarios we can, as opposed to just standard basics that they have to cover. In addition to that, I work on the patrol rifle range for the current officers to get recertified once a year. Firearms was one of my big backgrounds.
Yep. Okay. So you have both sidearms and rifles. Your police carry both.
That is correct.
Okay. For I guess comparison here in Australia, um, I know there were some cars when I was in the job that had the Ruger Mini 14s in them, but I think they ended up being taken out. And mainly everyday general duties police carried just their sidearm, which is now a Glock. Um, so there's a small difference there. What did you want to be when you were growing up as a kid, and why?
It's interesting. I never really even thought about it. I was such a weird, aloof kid that I was just so into sports. I didn't think about it. My dad owned a couple restaurants, and I started working in the restaurants when I was 11, bussing tables and then into the kitchen and learning the aspects of the restaurant. So my first semester in college, I was taking business classes because I simply knew in my soul that I'd run one of my dad's restaurants. And thankfully, about 6 months later, he sold all three of them, and I was set free from that forced career choice.
Can
I
you cook
I
though?
love to I can, and I love cooking for people. It's just the restaurant business is a hard business to be in.
Yeah, no, it especially now. I would have thought over the last 5 years it would have been It's tough everywhere, that sort of business. All right, so you thought you were going to follow your father's footsteps. You went to business school. Did you finish your business qualification?
No, I as soon as he sold the restaurants, I immediately changed my degree to criminal justice, which I
Okay.
completed.
Why did you do that? What was the impetus behind doing that?
One of my best friend's dads was the chief of federal probation in the state of Nebraska,
Hmm.
and I was just like, well, maybe that's a good career. Again,
What's
I
federal
Jason,
probation? Probation, sorry.
um, so if an inmate goes to prison and gets released, they're on parole when they
Yep.
leave. In the states, you can get probation, which is ahead of going to jail or prison.
Yep.
It's very similar to parole, but it's pre incarceration.
Okay, so it's like a good behavior bond almost.
Yes,
Okay, cool. Sorry, I interrupted you. You were going to say something else?
but even making that change in the schooling, I didn't even think much about it. It was like, well, okay, I'll change to this, and I just bebopped through college, the university. Like I'm just living for the day. I played American football
Yep.
in college, and literally that was my main focus. And when I got towards the end of where I almost had my degree, I met my wife, who was also studying the same program.
Yep.
And after she graduated, she got hired by the police department almost right away. I went into a job in corrections, which I did not like for about 2 years. Um, After struggling there, I moved on to a place for troubled youth, which where I'd worked when I was younger. And I
Yep.
loved that job, but it just wasn't a career path, I thought. And after my wife was an officer for several years, I would go to crew parties with her or social events and listening to all those cops that she worked with tell these stories, and I'm like, man, I got to get some of that. Um, I just knew there was an itch I had that I'm like I have to do something different. The place I worked was a good place with a good mission, but I just knew I wasn't fulfilling a career choice for me. So after she had 5 years on, I got hired and never looked back.
Would you class yourself as an altruistic person, do you think?
You know, I guess somewhat. It's interesting. I got my degrees in criminal justice, but my master's degrees in human services. And some of my cop friends used to say that I was the bleeding heart of the crew because of that background. I think it served me well later, but um, you know, I believe in the good of man and trying to be part of that good in society. And um, yeah, so I guess somewhat.
Yeah, look, I because I have a theory that intrinsically the majority of people that go into policing, whether they understand it or not, have a strong altruistic streak in them. That they believe in man, as you said, they believe in humanity, they believe in the good in people, and they go there to try and find that and keep that safe.
Yeah, and again, it gets kind of funny because almost every, at least in the states, the running joke is that you ask a brand new cop why he did it, did the job, and they
Yeah.
will say, "Well, I wanted to help people." And then you
Yep.
get later out of the career, and it's like, they joke about that, but
They
I
do the same
believe
here.
it is still true. Cops will say, "Oh, that's all BS," but that's because they're hardening themselves to keep the bad that they see out. They toughen their
Yep.
outer shell and try to act all tough. And it's like, but you know what? When they retire and you talk to them, they still did the job because they want to help people. They want to help keep keep good people away from the evil.
Yep. No, that's very true. Look, you've touched on a couple of things, and I'll come back and explore them. I guess so. You've applied. Your wife's become a police officer. You've done some other things. You've applied. How did that journey then go from when you applied to starting, and what was your first sort of you know posting shift, however it works?
In our department, we have to work the streets. Driving a
Yep.
just a patrol cruiser for 3 years minimum
Yep.
before you can try to do anything else. I spent 4 total years in patrol, and then I was given opportunity to go to a special operations unit, a gang suppression unit
Yep.
at our secret location. Um, and so I spent 4 years, excuse me, 4 years in the gang unit. And man, you want to talk about the Wild West.
Yeah.
Uh, for again, I worked the hardest precinct in Omaha when I worked it. So I was used to some of the chaos, but I wasn't doing dope deals and we weren't doing search warrants in patrol, but we got to the gang unit and Jason, we were serving dozens of search warrants a month and doing dope buys and rips and chasing down hardened gang members through the projects, housing project units. And it was crazy amounts of overtime. But it was, when I stepped into that, I'm like, wow, this is, uh, this is policing here.
It's sort of there goes. I did it to help people to go. Mm, who am I
Yeah.
helping?
Yeah.
How long's your police academy training program?
It's 21 weeks, generally speaking. I went through an abbreviated academy for whatever reason, whatever monetary reason, but it's
Yep.
21 weeks. And then you have about 21 more weeks in the field training section where
Yep.
you're paired up with a pro and you do the ride along for another 21 weeks.
So, and then after that, you're single officers or your double officer patrols?
It just depends on which precinct you're in and what the staffing level is.
Yep.
I went to a precinct that was busy. And even though a bunch of us on my first crew were rookies, a lot of us were in two officer cars or Baker car, as we call it.
Okay. Now, just I guess for clarification, so in Australia, you join a state police force or service, and they can post you anywhere in the state. Queensland's very big. I've been right up to the pointy part, and as far west as you can go as well. And we're talking, 3,500 kilometers north, and about 1,800 kilometers west from where I sit at the moment. So you can get sent anywhere. Does that work the same with? I'm assuming the you were with the state police, or were you with the county police? How does that work?
Now, see, the U.S. We've got all sorts of police forces.
Yep.
So I worked for the city of Omaha, and
Yep.
even though I was certified for the state of Nebraska as a law enforcement officer, my jurisdiction was simply the city of Omaha. We also have state officers like you.
Yep.
We have city officers. We have deputies that work for the county. Um, and then, because Omaha is just its own city, there's many small cities and towns around the city I work in that have departments as well. So we have many more layers of law enforcement here, it seems, into addition to our federal agencies as well.
So you could, if you went to a precinct, you would stay there for a long period of time, or they'd move you around precincts within the city, or how does that work?
We had a really good system, or we still do.
Yep.
We do a shift bid every 6 months, and you bid on the shift you're going to work, what time of day, and
Oh,
you bid
okay.
on which precinct you want to work in. And as the new guys, sometimes you get bumped around because you don't have enough seniority. But there's guys who have worked in the same precinct for 20 plus years just because they chose to do it. And you're not forced to try to get promoted. You can stay as just the lowest level of officer if
Hmm.
you choose to do so, or you can go through the promotional rank and then you get moved around when that happens.
Okay. Um, so you've joined the police. You did your 4 years in patrol. You then went to the gang unit, or the specialist unit. How long into your career did you go undercover, and how did that come about?
So 4 years in patrol, 4 years in gang, 1 year in the General Detectives Bureau wearing a shirt and tie, which was the least enjoyable part of my career. Um, and then right after that, I went into the narcotics unit, where I spent the last 14 years of my career working undercover.
So so, and I guess it sounds like talking to other people from North America in general that undercover is treated differently. You will work both undercover and normal policing in the same week sometimes.
Yeah, and especially for our department, just because someone's in narcotics doesn't mean that they're undercover, right? They're plain clothes.
Hmm.
I did direct undercover deals for that for the lion's share of that 14 years. But additionally, I was attached to our department's SWAT team for 16 years, obviously longer than narcotics.
Yep.
So when I would do any of my SWAT work, anything that I did outside of our secret office, so to speak, if I was in around other police officers, then I just had a balaclava covering my face because I was dual tasked. Um, yeah, and so I worked undercover 14 years, but it wasn't like I was living in some house for 14 years by myself, or that I was with the Hells Angels, or that I was with the Mexican cartel.
Yep.
I did other duties during that time frame, but I maintained um, my undercover status, and I maintained my anonymity um, outside of that building that I worked in, um, as best I could during that time frame.
Okay, so I'll come to some of the stories, and there are some really good stories for those that are listening that I've seen. I just want to just drop back into your book. What, when did you write it, and why did you write it?
It's crazy. Is this coming weekend was the 1 year anniversary when I started writing the book. I started
Okay.
writing May of 2023, and I handed in my original manuscript in November.
Yep.
115,000 words, way too long. And my editor chopped it up and got it back to me in December.
Yep.
Then for the next until February, we went back and forth, changing this, fixing that, basically just reshuffling where stuff was going to be.
Yep.
And the book came out in March of this year, so it was a 9 month, 10 month process, which is pretty fast.
Yep.
But I will say this: is that insomnia can be uh, can be a writer's best friend. To type from 10 p.m. till 8 a.m. because you can't sleep. Uh, it just really flowed fast. I thought it would take much longer to do it.
No, that's good. Is there anything they cut out that you wish they hadn't?
Oh, there's so much.
Yeah.
I try. I did the best I could to tell stories about a lot of the people that I worked with. Things that I was involved in, but other officers and some of the finite details. My editor, who's a wonderful lady, she says the person in Australia doesn't really care about that because they don't know that person. You know him. That's important to you. So a lot of the stories got cut down. Um, some of the specific stories that were cut out were just more drug cases or more SWAT operations. Yeah, I suppose
Yep.
to answer that. I guess there was some of the joking stuff we did when I was a patrol officer, where we messed with each other. We played pranks on each other during our shift. There were some
Yep.
really really good ones.
What's the best prank you ever played or had played on you?
We used to do this dumb thing. We would, if guys were on a call, we'd sneak up because all the cars had the same key. It didn't matter. We drove Ford Crown Vics.
I know where this is
If you
going.
pull
Yeah.
pull up to a guy that's on a busy call, he put down his back passenger window or back driver window. Um, Previously, you have to have a handful of broken glass from an automobile accident, and you try to get a piece that's maybe this big that's still intact. You throw all
Yep.
the loose pieces on the back of the seat. You put a rock or a brick in the back seat, and you take the piece that's this big and you stuff it in the window, the sealant. And he walks out and he thinks someone threw a brick through his window. And
Oh,
as dumb as that is, to sit back a block away and watch him, it just cut the tensions, because it is such a hard job, as you well know,
yeah.
and it's harder these days. Maybe not because crime is harder or more violent. It's harder because cops probably across the world, but I know in America, they're not allowed to do that kind of stuff. They're not allowed to vent and let off steam. And that's all that stuff is when you're
Yeah,
messing around with your buddies. And you have to let off steam because yesterday you took a call where a guy put a shotgun in his mouth and pulled the trigger and his eyelid was on the refrigerator when you walked in, and you're supposed to do a report and go on about your business and then
yeah,
have it not affect you. Are
yep.
you kidding me? And we can't vent and we can't laugh and have fun. But some of those fun things were taken away. But man, when I was still in doing that, the cruise that I run, we did it all the time. It was a riot.
Well, we maybe not that. What would usually, if there was ever, so we have a lot of schools and things in one of the areas that are actually just about everywhere I worked. But on night work, sometimes it's not as busy as other nights. And if there's a job at a school, the car will get tasked and they'll pull up, and sometimes they get out and forget and leave their keys in the car, or there's always a spare set of keys. So we go back to the station, get the spare set of keys, come back, jump in the car, move the car around the corner, and then sit around the other corner and wait for them to come out and go, "Where's the car?"
Oh yeah, we've done that as well. And see, that was the
um,
thing with the Ford Crown Vic. They all had the same keys. I bet you
oh, okay.
I could have pulled up to a Ford Crown Vic in Chicago and jumped in and drove away. They were all the same.
All keyed the
Not
same.
very smart.
And like you said, it's juvenile. It's a bit of fun. People look at it, will look at it and go, "Oh, that's just silly. You should be more responsible." But it's a release valve. It's a way of putting laughter and fun into a job where you, as you've said, you've seen something that most people will never see in their entire life, and you do that on a regular basis. And if you don't laugh and you don't have fun, um, the effects of it are going to be much greater. And I want to come back to that. Just tell us about your book, where you can get the book, where people who are listening can get the book, and the details will be in the bottom in the description underneath this video.
Ram One's the easiest locator on Amazon.com.
Okay, that's pretty simple. Um, all right, so just getting back to your journey through the police, you've gone to the gang squad, the narcotics or drug squad, as we call it. Um, how did you get into doing undercover?
Man, Jason, I was so excited to do undercover. I was even in the gang unit. I was wanted to do it, and they
Why?
wouldn't allow it. I
Why were you? Why?
you know, my biological father was a drug dealer.
Okay.
He got caught up. He got caught up in a wiretap with a whole bunch of heroin, 6 ounces of H, and that kind of of course, my mom moved on from him, and my
Yep.
stepdad is who raised me and who I took my name
Yep.
after. And it was always bothersome to me. And I don't know if that's why I got into that. Um, I suppose the reason because it's harder than just using an informant to buy dope. It's a little more challenging, a little more dangerous, maybe. Um, I I suppose I was kind of an adrenaline junkie, so
Yep.
maybe that was the reason. I never really put my finger on it 100%. And even in the book, I don't explain it very well as to why I wanted to do it so badly, but man, I wanted to do it. And uh, that's what I did for a long time.
Do you take risks doing it? Like, do you do other things outside of policing and in your general life that people would consider generally risky?
I bungee jumped once, shoot, when I was
Yep.
back in college, but, yeah, I'm not a giant risk taker like that. I suppose by the time I got into the career and was doing the things we were doing, it's like, well, these are enough risks, I guess. But yeah, I don't consider myself one of those adrenaline junkies. I watch some of these videos now that where these people do the extreme stuff of jumping off a cliff with one of those capes and or the wingsuits and or
Yep.
they're riding their mountain bike on a 2 foot wide ridge, camelback ridge on a mountain. And I'm like, man, if you fall off, you're dead.
Yep.
That's watching those videos scares me, but for me, knocking in a door on a homicide suspect was just like going to lunch. That never bothered me. Um,
No,
I
it's
guess that
interesting
was
though.
so.
You say if you fall off the cliff, or like if something doesn't work on the wingsuits or something, you're dead. I would have thought that in the middle of a drug buy, if you say the wrong thing or the wrong person walks in, the same thing could happen. But you don't equate the dangers of both as being the same.
I had mine was more of just an excitement level, and the only real trepidation I had doing the undercover deals was that were they going to believe my story?
Yep.
Because of my SWAT background and the extensive training we had. And it sounds mean or it sounds bravado, or it sounds callous, I guess. But every deal I went into, I had a plan to kill the guy if it went bad. Um,
Okay.
and it's just silly, but and I had, I believe I had the means to do it. And I didn't worry about that part of it. I worried about, was he going to call my bluff and then, say, hey, you're a cop, and walk out the door, or whatever. And then I would just I'd be a failure at not getting the deal. I really didn't have a whole lot of apprehension of doing the deal. My first undercover deal was, I wasn't there yet, but um, that was quite a scary deal, to be brutally
What
honest. But
happened? What happened there?
so I had no training. I went to a 2-week basic narcotics school when I was
Yep.
still in the gang unit, because in the gang unit we did so much drug work. But
Yep.
when I got to narcotics, there wasn't any type of undercover school to go to, or I hadn't seen one yet. And I was just, telling all my crewmates, hey, I want to do an undercover deal. And so lo and behold, my longtime partner and friend Edie, she had an informant, uh, a Mexican guy who didn't speak English, and he wanted to sell guns. I'm like, well, I'll buy guns. So I go do this gun deal with a guy named Jesus. I figured I was
Yeah.
safe, the
Yeah.
Hispanic version of
Yeah.
Jesus. I figured I was going to be good to
Yep.
go.
Yep.
Um, he didn't he
Except
didn't speak
he did
English.
die on a cross.
Yes, correct. Um, so he didn't speak English. I spoke very little Spanish, and the Spanish I spoke was to tell someone how to get on the ground and put your hands behind your back, which wasn't going to help me in a dope deal. The
No.
informant sat in the back seat of my car, a little two-door Blazer. And anyways, um, we pull up, and he gets in the car, and this is a tiny little car to where if it was two big guys like me, our shoulders would almost be touching in the front
Yep.
seats. And as soon as he got in, he's beating sweat. He is nervous as he could possibly be, and he keeps looking out the passenger window like the raid team's coming. And I'm trying to tell him, hey, listen, calm down, tranquilo. And the informant is telling him to calm down, female informant. And
Yep.
so he hands me the gun, and it's just a shitty gun, but which isn't the crazy part. The crazy part was, as soon as he handed me the gun, he put his right hand back in under his coat.
Ooh.
He had his hand on a shoulder. He had a shoulder rig, and I've
Yep.
held a gun a million times, and I know what it's like to have a shoulder rig. I know it's like where the gun is and how you hold it and how it fills your
Yep.
hand. And he had his right hand on a pistol the whole time, and I'm to his left. Um, well, my left hand is down by my left thigh, which is on my Glock 30. And so here it is, that moment from Good, Bad, and the Ugly with the music playing. Who's going to move first?
Yep.
Well, and he keeps looking out the window like the raid team is coming. And it's like, calm down. Well, the gun was a piece of crap, like I said. And um, so the informant's like, well, hey, Paul's looking for dope too. He needs a new plug for meth. And he was kind of nervous about that. He sold me a gun. I don't know why he'd be nervous about meth, but so with his left hand, he never took his right hand out of his coat.
Yep.
With his left hand, he gives me, a couple grams of dope. Um, I keep my left hand where it's at, and with my right hand, I take the gun, I take the dope, and I pay him. And it was this weird ballet of, he's only using his left hand, I'm only using my right hand. Our other hands were on our guns, and he keeps looking out the window like the raid team's coming. And I'm thinking, if he pulls the gun out, I'm just going to smash him with my right arm and
Yep.
lean into him, and then shoot
Yep.
him with my left hand. Um, and it just was one of those, man. It was 10 minutes of tension. I don't know why it even took that long, but it took about 10 minutes. Um, he's trying to get me to try the dope. That one's easy to get out of, and I got out of
Yeah.
it. And he believed me. And So no big deal. The deal is fine over. He leaves, and again, so that's not that that crazy, right? But a week later,
I don't know. It's pretty crazy.
Edie asked me to buy another gun from him, and I'm like, hell yeah, I'm in. I love this. I want to buy guns and dope. And she says, well, Paul, I'm not going to let you agree to it until I give you some information. I'm like, okay, what's the scoop? She's like, well, we got some information on Jesus that we didn't know last week. Like, what's that? Well, he killed two people in a cartel hit about 3 4 weeks ago. Um, and so we know he's a murderer. We're not sure if homicide is going to be able to pin the case on him. So we want to continue to buy dope and guns off him to give him the best sentence we can get if we can't prove these murders. So I said, okay, that's cool. At least I know who he is now. And I bought dope and guns from him a couple more times, and they were successful. And then unfortunately, his life kind of kicks you in the gut sometimes. I had an injury on the SWAT team, which required surgery during that
Yep.
time frame. So I was pulled away from the case, obviously, because I couldn't do it on a limited duty.
Yep.
And consequently, Edie took that case to the end and arrested probably 15 people, and she won Officer of the Year for the case because it was a fantastic investigation. And I got to watch it from the sidelines, which was kind of a bummer, but was happy
Well,
for her.
you're involved at the beginning. Did they pin the murder on
Yeah,
him? The murders on him?
they never did. No, he did. I think Jesus did 8 or 10 years, and he was deported. It was interesting. I actually did some sleuth work, and I found his Facebook page down in Mexico, and assuming he's staying down there. Um,
Fair
yeah.
enough. Now, before we sort of started talking about that particular story, you were talking about how you got into being a UC, a 2 week course, and then bang, off you go. You do your first buy, so to speak. Um, the transfer to narcotics, was the expectation that going to narcotics you would be doing more UC work?
Well, I was hoping that was the going to be the plan. Yeah.
Okay, but it was
Yeah. So that,
it wasn't advertised in the job.
yeah, no. And so I did that basic 2 week course when I was still in the gang unit, and then I did some deals, and then like school came open, and I went to an undercover school, and then I did a follow advanced undercover school,
How
like a
long
year
were the,
later.
the courses?
They were both a week long, so
Okay.
it's nothing crazy. It's not like I tried and tried to get to do some of the big federal, um, you know, 2 month undercover training courses, but I was
Yep.
never accepted. You know, and I don't know if it would have worked out, but you just kind of learned on the job. There were some other guys in our department who had worked undercover, and I would pick their brain on how they did what they did, how they avoided certain things, um, and I fully admit, boy, my first couple of years I was not very good, to be honest. I had some successful deals, but I did dumb things or said dumb things. I tried to be someone I really wasn't,
Yep.
and telling this giant long fabricated lie as to who I was. And I soon learned that it was easier to be me, and it was easier to tell the truth, tell 90% truth and a little bit of lie, because you remember the truth. And
Yeah. Yep.
I was way more successful the last 12 years than I was the first 2 years.
Did you use covert names, or did you use your real name?
I used my first name and a covert
Yep.
last name, and I
Yep.
used a nickname on the street. And again, that was kind of the thing of try to be somewhat truthful to remember certain things. I used a variation of my birthday that was easy, and
Yep.
a funny quick story. So on my undercover ID, my state driver's license, I used an address where I used to live when I was younger,
Okay.
and no big deal. How is that ever going to come back and affect me? Um, I started buying dope from this female, and we only knew her by her first name. And some of the other investigators at my offsite, they finally
Yep.
found her a true identity. It's like, oh, okay, cool, this is who it is. Um, Lo and behold, her address on her driver's license was the address I used on my driver's license. Her mother was two residents removed from my mom and dad, at the same house. And
Oh,
so
okay.
just think if for somehow I would have been dumb enough to say, "Hey, here's my license, here's who I am, and here's my address." I didn't, but how many guys get to buy dope from someone who lived in a house where they lived in when they were younger?
Yeah, not
Just
many, I
it
would
was
have
just a
thought.
crazy coincidence. Crazy coincidence.
But it also goes to show how the best planning sometimes there's nothing is going to stop coincidence. It's just you can't
Correct.
plan for it. It's one of those things. Yeah, that's very freaky. Um, all right, so and as you say, look, one of the things that we got taught is that the best lie has a large amount of truth in it. It's the little details because you can remember it. I use Michael Bates. People say Michael now, and I still turn around. Michael became, or I became Michael became me, or I became Michael. Like one of the two. And it's just one of those things that that name just sticks with me. So 14 years, you're married at the time. The operations that we did were you had a bunch of targets. You would go out and you get a safe house and you would do the jobs and you would do that operation. Then you come back and then you go do operations. It sounds like you were doing piecemeal operations, small buy busts over long periods of time, or small buys over long periods of time while doing other things. Was there ever an operation where you went, I've got to do this. I've got to be someone for 3 months, move out of home, the whole setup ready to go?
I never had that opportunity. It's
Did
obviously
you
very
want that
expensive.
opportunity?
I thought about it, and then I went back to thinking, you know what? I'm getting to do what I want to do anyways. I wanted to try to intentionally put my family first,
Yep.
and I really wouldn't have had an opportunity to do that. And I guess I'm glad I didn't have that opportunity. The I was a task force officer with our Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and they have guys that do that.
Yep.
But I don't believe my department would have even allowed me to do it. I know some local UCs, we'll keep their names out of it, who did
Yeah.
exactly that. They worked for the FBI as an
Yep.
informant, and they traveled the country, and they'd be gone 2 months here, 2 months there, a week here, a week there, and the FBI would insert them into ongoing investigations already. Um, but I never did that, and he was a super undercover. He's a good friend, and um, again, I don't believe that my department would ever allow me to do that or anybody else. It's just not what they're into.
Yep. No, that's fair enough. When you first joined the police, did people tell you look like a police officer?
Yes,
Yeah. When you were working in the gang squad, did people tell you look like a police officer? Could they tell you were a police officer?
yes, yep.
Did that worry you when you became when you started working undercover?
It didn't worry me that they would. It would worry me that I would just bump into somebody that had already arrested.
Did that happen?
And I
What was
believe
the possibility of that happening?
probably pretty good. I mean, 'cause we arrested lots and lots of people. I mean, we were in the gang unit, man. We put hundreds of people away a year. It was a
Yeah.
free for all, and the hunting was good. We had really aggressive prosecutors at the time, both state and federal, and we were bumping up people to no end. And the other issue, Jason, is that because I didn't do it to the level you did as far as the backstop. I had an ID that was a legitimate ID, and I had an
Yep.
undercover vehicle that didn't come back to anything. Um, but I would still have to go to a city pump to get gas. So I would
Yep.
go to the most obscure city pumps I could to get gas. Um, and I still would have to go to court occasionally. And that was one of the driving forces for me to try to push every case I did undercover, as opposed to, hey, I'll go undercover with this guy and use informants for these people. I tried to push everything undercover because then I didn't have to go to court. People wouldn't fight an undercover case. They rarely would fight it. So my need to go to the courthouse would be to get an arrest warrant signed or a search warrant signed, and we had the ability to get a hold of a judge who was a duty judge and do that in off hours if we needed to.
Yep.
Because my biggest fear was walking through the courthouse, and
You
that
don't like
sucked.
people in
You know,
suits, or
just all the criminals. I mean, just
oh,
there's
right.
hundreds and
Yeah.
hundreds of criminals walking in and out, and I have to go through the magnetometers like they do, and
Yep.
I'm wearing a gun. And
Yep.
the deputies that work the magnetometers know that I'm undercover cop, and they'll try to wave me through. And all
Yep.
these criminals are watching me get waved through. And I'm like, so I would
Yep.
scout it out and then try to look down the hallway. And when there's nobody waiting in line, then I'd scuttle down the hallway to try to go through, so people wouldn't see me walking through, and not getting checked. It's not a great setup, to be brutally honest.
Yep.
I have another partner who was an ATF, who's a Fed, and they did everything completely different. It was way better backstop than what we did. Um, but we rolled with the punches, I guess.
Has over your time doing it, has the focus on, I don't know if safety is the right word, but the security around it changed, or is it still the same, the way that you're talking now, where it to me, you talking, it sounds like you're saying it's not taking as seriously as it should be.
It is not. It still is not. But I also know this, so that the amount of guys or gals doing undercover within our department has really decreased. I did the week that I retired, I did a presentation to a state agency. There was 500 cops and 500 supposed narcotics officers in attendance, and I was polling the crowd to see how many guys are working undercover. And in that group of 500 who were working direct undercover, and in that group of 500, I had three people raise their hand, which just was surprising to me. I, and I got out at a time where the defund the police was high,
Yep.
and I think just a lot of motivation around the country, at least in the states, motivation around the country was, why would we want to risk our necks when prosecutors aren't prosecuting to the 10th degree, and nobody seems to care what cops are doing as far as doing good. So I think a lot of the narcs are like, why would I risk my neck to do the extra one? It really isn't going to make a difference anyways. And I think it's a shame, because I think they do better um, cases if it's undercover, and I
Yep.
know they have stronger cases, but it's not mine for me to tell them what to do.
No, that's the point of this. So you can say what people should do, and they'll never listen to it. Um, why did you get out?
I had a long career on the SWAT team, and I was generally the ram guy. And
Yep.
in my career, I rammed over 1,000 doors with just
Can
a manual
you
breaching ram.
talk, just for those of us who aren't from America and who have never been in SWAT, what a RAM guy is and what you do and how you do it?
Yeah, so I'm holding a 60-pound tube of steel with handles on it and a faceplate. I'm the battering ram that's gonna knock the door off the hinges. And up until the last couple years, we did mainly no knock search warrants. So it
Yep.
means every warrant we went on, we rammed the door.
Yep.
Now there's more of a push to do a knock and announce, and a lot of those times people will come to the door. Um, but in my 18 years of special operations between a gang unit and narcotics and on the SWAT team, I rammed over 1,000 doors, and man, I just destroyed my shoulders, and I got terrible arthritis in my hands. And so I was 51, and I was the oldest guy on the SWAT team, and my body was breaking down, and I really felt that I was on the precipice of being a detriment to the team, as opposed to um, on the good side, because
Yep.
if I couldn't physically do something to help a teammate of mine, then it was time to go. So as soon
Yep.
as I hit that moment of, you know what, I'm kind of broke physically, it's time to leave. So I left the SWAT team, and then it was like 6 months later, 9 months later, that my longtime supervisor, he was my boss 18 of my 23 years, Dave Bianchi, he was being forced out at a 30-year mark. and so I just retired the same time that he retired. So I left 2 years early. 25 is kind of when most people retire in the states, or at
Yep.
least in Omaha. I left at 23 because I physically couldn't do the job. I physically couldn't do SWAT, and I was kind of had run my course on the undercover world, and I was like, you know what, it's just time to go.
Didn't want to go back, sit behind a desk in a uniform.
No, no, this guy doesn't wear a shirt and a tie. I couldn't operate in the even when I left, I still wasn't physically. I wouldn't have passed the physical exam um, to get back to full duty. I had two rotator cuff surgeries back to back, and
Yep.
that is just a debilitating surgery. So I was still riding a desk for my last 5 months, just pushing paper and assisting on the backside, and I'd had enough of that. It was time to go.
When you left, did you have an idea of what you were going to do afterwards, or it was I'm just going to leave and the rest will work itself out?
My wife and I have a small training company, a firearms training company,
Yep.
and I've done some motivational speaking on like situational awareness for high school kids.
Yep.
Um, I had no plans of going back to the department part time. In fact, I said I would never do it. Um, but when they created this new position for retired guys to run the range, I thought, man, firearms is one of my loves anyways. I can do that
Yep.
2, 3 days a week. And that's all it is, 2 or 3 days a week. Um, and I was just kind of killing time until my wife retired, and she retired 3 weeks ago after 30
Okay.
years. So now we're both kind of looking at the future of doing some traveling and some things like that.
Well, you should come out to Australia. That's the place you should go. Now, when you as a police officer, you get a pension. Is that right?
That's correct.
So you effectively get paid to be retired.
Yes. Yeah. In the States, we have for non pension people, there's what's called Social Security.
Yeah.
For But as police officers, because we have a pension, we don't get Social Security. So yeah, my pension is based on my input in my career, basically. So yeah,
Okay.
and
Well,
it's a livable wage, which is very nice, to do that for as long as you do, and to to be in the mix like that. It's nice that you can have a livable wage for that career.
is that forever, or does it cut out after a certain number of years?
No, it's until you die. For cops,
Okay.
it's usually not that long. It seems like,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yes. That is very true. All right. So you're out. You're doing this part time work. Um, you enjoy it because of the firearms? What about the training part with the new people coming through? Does that float your
I
boat?
probably enjoy that. I probably enjoy that more than anything, to be brutally honest. If I would have
Why?
had enough guts, I would have left narcotics 2 years before I did, and went to the academy to be an instructor. And you asked why, and it's because I love the job, and I love training, and I've got a I've got a mode of turning whatever the scenario, whatever the training modicum is that time, is adding the realism of scenario based training. That was one thing we did on SWAT a lot, is instead of just doing door clearing, let's add a scenario to it. It makes it more realistic. And I do the same things with the recruits, whether it's the firearms aspect of it, or whether it's the tactics, or whether it's room clearing, or how to do a traffic stop. I play the bad guy on the traffic stops, and I know how to be a bad guy because I was a bad guy for a long time. And
Yep.
so the whole searching the car for drugs and all those things, I get dressed up like I used to dress when I was undercover, looking like a biker type. And so these raw recruits are coming up to a door of this big dude with the beard and a cut off sleeve shirt, and he looks like a biker, and I'm playing the part during their academy traffic stops. And I think it just takes it to another level. And again, this isn't about me. This is just about how to train in a more
Yep.
realistic way.
Yep.
Lots of guys do it, but I absolutely enjoy trying to train for the realism of what they're going to find on the streets, and to see them be scared at the window in a training scenario is like, okay, cool, because you're going to be scared on the streets your first couple traffic stops. You need to understand how to work with that, as opposed to them going up to the window on a traffic stop of their standard academy instructor who's wearing their polo with their badge on their shirt. They know
Yep.
that guy's not going to hurt them.
Yep.
So that's why
No,
I enjoy
that's
it.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Obviously, you tell the people you're training your background, or they know your background, that you've done you what we call your general duties, your uniform stuff, what you call patrol, um, the gang stuff, the narcotics, the SWAT, the undercover. They know all of that about you.
Yeah, they come to know it. The first couple times we do scenarios with them, we've kind of left it blank, so they don't
Yep,
really know who we are. We're just extra role players.
yep,
But then as we're teaching them, we start telling them, Here's why I know these things. This is what
yep.
I did for this length of time."
What's the biggest question you get about the undercover work?
I think the biggest one is, are you scared when you do it? Like you asked earlier, and are you
Yep.
scared? Um, and that wasn't really something that gave me fear necessarily.
What about, do you have anyone come up to you and say, "Hey, I'd really like to be an undercover"?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's young cops who want to do it, and I've mentored a few guys along the way,
What advice do you
and
give them?
a lot of what I was just telling you got to tell mostly the truth, and um, you have to have 3 steps ahead of them in your planning when they ask you something, and you have to sell it. And I don't mean selling the fact that you've got this long backdrop story of something that's phony, but mostly what's true.
Mhm.
I had a truck that I drove that looked like it was a construction truck, right? Pouring concrete kind of truck. That was my undercover vehicle for a long time. And I didn't just use the truck. I had all the equipment in the truck, and I would
Yep,
have bid sheets on my dashboard. And I had a guy come up to my window once who my informant was going to introduce me to, and I found out later that he was a former informant for a different agency, and his name was Phil. It's like, "Hey, what do you do, Paul?" I said, I'm in concrete work." He's like, "Bullshit, you don't do concrete." And so because I had pre-planned, Jason, up on my dash or up above my visor,
yeah,
I pulled down a bid sheet and I handed it to him. And I wrote that bid sheet that day, had the date on it and the address, and it was my old address. So I know the address, and
yep,
I could describe the driveway I was going to pour and all the dimensions. And I know a little
yep,
bit about concrete. So I had the numbers on there, the measurements and the cost and the labor hours. And I handed him the bid sheet and said, "F you." And he looks at it for about a minute. He's like, "Oh, I guess you do
okay.
do concrete." And I'm like, "Yeah, now get out of my face, punk." Um, and I ended up buying dope from him a couple days later because he believed my story. And I think that's where some guys fall short, is that, you know, and that was me. The first couple times that somebody asked me what I did, "Oh, I'm a welder." And I'm not, I don't know shit about welding. Um,
Yep,
and I could tell there's times where they wouldn't believe me. And so, like, I can't use that story anymore because I'm not a welder, but I know concrete and I know some construction. So I let them know they have to kind of be backstopped to themselves since our department doesn't do it. Have some props to come with you, have some things they can see. Um, I used to put pictures of me and my buddies who aren't cops on the sun visor of my car, or especially if they were friends of mine that had passed away.
yep,
Because like, if there's a picture of this guy and there's a picture of someone else, they're wearing construction outfits. It just sold it. That this is what I do. And that's when I got better. Originally
it's
I
the
looked
little
like this.
details.
Yeah, I looked like this big burly biker. I used to wear my Harley Davidson shirts cut
Yep,
off, and the goatee was down to my belly button, and I acted like a biker, and I'm not a biker. And a lot of the deals that I had that failed, my boss would say later, is like, "I think you scared the crap out of that dude. You look too mean. He thinks you're gonna beat him up or you're gonna rip him off." And when I finally went to that undercover school, the guy's like, "Yeah, you look too mean, dude. You're scaring people. Change your look. You need to smile more." And so I went from the biker look to like a construction worker look.
Yep,
Um, and instead of being the tough guy, I was just a dude. That was it.
okay.
And that's what I pass on to these guys, is you got to just be the dude. You got to be an everyday nobody. You know,
Yep, yep. What's the biggest myth you think there is out there about undercover?
shoot, that we drive Ferraris and eat lobster every day. I don't know. I mean, in our department, they think that you work at the offsite, that it's a gold paved road, and things are just awesome, and they don't realize that you're digging through trash with maggots in it to get to look for things. But as far as just the undercover itself, I don't know, probably that you're going to the bars and drinking all the time and hanging out with you know naked women, kind of like your story. Um,
Yep. Well,
um,
they were naked some of the time, not all the time, but yeah,
yeah.
anyway.
Um, I I think maybe the biggest myth is that it's easy and it's always glamorous, and what they don't know is that once you're into those people, into that world, man, my phone was on 24/7. And not
Yeah.
that my phone was on, and I was working my phone 24/7. If they're hitting you up about something, even if you're going to blow them off, you got to somehow blow them off. And so it was a 24/7 job, and to be at dinner with your wife and your daughter, and have to be dealing with stuff like that kind of kind of sucks. But if I want that deal to go, then I still gotta play the part even when I'm not working.
Was that probably the hardest part or the most difficult part was that, when you're out and having to be on 24/7, but have a life as well?
Yeah, and then obviously my wife was a cop, and she worked in narcotics for a couple of years early in her career and did a little bit of undercover, not very much at all, but a little bit.
Yep.
But so she knew the role, obviously. My daughter grew up me looking like this and generally wearing jeans and a Harley t-shirt. Um, And so we had code words set up. If we were out in public and I should happen to bump into or see someone that I had been dealing with or
Mhm.
am currently dealing with, we had code words set up. Hey, listen, Dad's got to go to work, and squeeze her hand and just walk away from them. Um, and she was amazing. My daughter, well, she rolled with the punches. She didn't tell other people what her dad did, but
Yep.
you know, she had to kind of understand why Dad looked like an idiot for 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 so long. 'Cause
Yep.
I just look like a bum.
Which is always the way to go undetected, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
I guess I wanna go back to something you said when you were talking about writing your book. The fact that, um, staying awake, not being able to sleep is good for when you wanna write a book. Why do you think you apart from the fact you were writing the book, I won't assume that the reason that you couldn't sleep was because you wanted to write the book. I'm assuming that's, something that happened gradually over time. Do you think the job has affected you to that point to not sleep properly?
Oh yeah, 100%. I've been insomnia, have suffered from insomnia for numbers of years. You again, as you well know, it's a tough deal, and I ran for so long. That entire 16 years when I was on the SWAT team, I was undercover, and um, not only was I doing undercover work and doing narc warrants and doing SWAT hits, there was multiple days in a row of working 18 hours a day, and there was times I would sleep in my suburban in the parking lot
Yeah,
because it's 3 in the morning. I got to be there at 6. I might as well just sleep here. Um, and constantly chasing your tail, it just that has an effect on the human body. That the adrenaline dumps, which you don't even feel anymore, they're still there. You just don't feel them. All the extra cortisol in your body, changes your body chemistry, and insomnia is one of the root effects of that. And you know, gaining weight around the midsection, and
yeah, we can all
um,
relate to that.
yeah, short temper, things like that.
Yep.
It's real.
Have you spoken to anyone about those sorts of things?
As far as like a counselor,
Yeah, well, anyone. Well, it doesn't have to be a professional, but, have you
no, yeah,
have you spoken to anyone about them or
it's getting so much more open, and it's so much more accepted for law enforcement and military guys and gals to openly talk about, hey, they see someone. I haven't seen anybody personally. I've done a
Yep.
ton of talking with very close friends, and whether they're a therapist or not, I think you're still getting something out of it.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
After my officer involved shooting where I killed that guy, the department forces you to see a psychologist 3 or 4 times before you come back to make sure you're ready to come back. That was, those were good sessions. And I
Yep.
went back voluntarily with him for 3 or 4 more sessions about 6 months later because, I don't think I had really accepted the gravity of it.
Yep.
And I was trying to be too bravado, and it was beneficial. And like I stated earlier, that's a little bit of my background before I became a cop is the mental health field. Yeah, so there's no shame in anybody, you know, talking to a professional about that kind of stuff. And um, maybe I should look into it, for the sleep part of it. I don't know.
It's more a question that in doing this, I've been discovering more about PTSD and those sorts of things. Generally, I'm the type of person. Let's say I lose my job tomorrow, I'll get another job on Monday. That's just how it is. My partner kicks me out, I'll be fine. My dog dies, I'll be upset, but she'll stop snoring. Um, but the more you go through it, those things like those short bursts of anger, the not being able to sleep, the all those sorts of things, you look at it and you go, okay, that's a common thing. And you talk to people, and it's like, well, maybe there is a bit of PTSD in there. Maybe there are things that are affecting me that I don't realize are affecting me because for so long they were just normal things.
Yeah, you're right. I just personally, and this is just Paul.
Yeah.
The PTSD part of it, I have a hard time accepting that label only because I almost feel, and it's not, but I almost feel like it's reserved for the military people who I was
Okay.
never in combat. I was involved in shootings, but I was never in combat. There weren't bombs dropping on me. And I know that at least here in the States, sometimes that gets abused, the PTSD angle. And um, obviously, if someone has PTSD, then I'll be your biggest supporter. But
Yep.
here we see some phony cases, or lots of phony cases, and it's bothered me. If you wanted to call it PTSD, well then, hey, okay, tell me that's mine. That's fine. But it's
Yep.
almost like, to me, in my heart, that's reserved for the military guys who were in Iraq and Afghanistan and
Yeah. Yeah.
Vietnam. And it's just, I feel ashamed if I would accept that label when
What would you
partners
call
of
the stress?
partners
Sorry, what would you call the stress then? You think the police deal with,
some type of longevity career stress disorder, I guess. And
or
again,
we can
there's
start?
lots
We
of
could
similar
start a
things.
we could start a new acronym.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to, like I mentioned, you're here at Thanksgiving dinner and maybe you're having a tiff with your family members, but yesterday you looked at a guy who put a 12 gauge in his mouth and
Yeah.
pulled the trigger, and his head's all over the wall.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to now go have Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow, and like it's no big deal. Um,
I don't even think
and
it's dealing with the public. You can do that, and then later in your shift, you can be doing a traffic stop with some young kid who's decided to get stroppy because they want to defund the police, and the the natural response is, "Dickhead, you've got no idea what I just did." Back in your
yeah,
box, and that gets you in trouble.
100%. And I used to go back to my old high school every spring and every fall, and I would do a 1 day class with one of my old instructors, which was great. And I would and it was basically just an hour-long session of Q&A about the job.
Yep.
And they always want to know about SWAT and narcotics, obviously. But um, I would flat out tell them, the first things I would say is, listen, I'll tell you everything I can tell you legally, and something that's not case sensitive. I'm probably going to swear. I said, but one thing I'll tell you, if you have the question, is why was the cop who pulled me over an asshole? And why did you think that guy was a complete jerk when you got pulled over? And so somebody will ask, and it's like, hey, listen, you have no idea what that guy or gal just went through. They could have just left a suicide scene. They could have just left an infant death scene, or a fatal accident, or a fire, or you name the hundreds of things they left in the last month
Hmm.
that are building in their soul. And you're supposed to do it with a smile, and you're supposed to do it right 100% of the time, every time, and not have any faults. and then you got the 16-year-old punk who's talking smack, and you snap at him, and whatever you do, and then you get in trouble because now it's on video.
Yep.
Um, yeah, so that just all adds up 100%. And so, yeah, it's is that post traumatic, or is that just, like I said, kind of a longevity thing that builds up? I believe that cops have it. Um, I
You just
just,
don't
again,
like the
personally,
label.
it's a weird thing. Yeah, I don't know what to label it, because
Yeah.
to me, it's all just a military thing, and I love the guys in green, and they're my heroes.
Yep. No, that's fair enough. Just in regards to going to schools, you've lived, I guess, the whole defund the police thing, and I've been out of it. I've seen some of the stuff here. It's not really big in Australia. We don't have that same culture, I guess, of hating police to the extent that they have in the States. But I guess one of the things is, do you think police are their own worst enemies in the fact that they don't do enough of explaining why something might have happened, why a response was the way it was? It's more nothing to see here. We're just going to put up the brick wall, and you can yell and shout that the fact that someone abused you, but we're not going to explain it. We're not going to do anything about it. And the community doesn't understand enough what police go through to get to that point.
I think that the individual officers may not do a good job. I do believe that there's a movement amongst departments across the country to
Hmm.
say just what you're saying. Hey, listen, it's a two-sided street here, and there's lots of things that you just don't have a clue about, and um, your perceived attention towards the cops as to what they're doing and why they're doing it, or your perceived, let's call it what it is, the perceived racism you think is out there,
Yep.
um, is is phony, and the absolute lion's share of cops that I've ever met across the country. Um, but yeah, but we don't do a good job individually, and but it's hard. If you go on a call, and the people are mfing you, and I don't know how you're gonna weave in. Hey, listen, let me get on my soapbox for a while and tell you the day that I had. You're gonna do the call and go home.
But I
Um,
don't think it's an individual's response to that. I personally believe, and look, part of this whole concept of talking to people like yourself, and hopefully more, is for people to be able to see and understand what police go through. So the next time they have an interaction with someone, they might not say that smart ass comment. They might not be a dick. They
yeah,
might not do that because they don't. They might have an understanding of what's going on or what they may have seen or been to in the last day, week, month, year, whatever. And I guess uh, from where I sit, police are their own. The police, when I say in general, the police departments. Uh, Marketing are their own worst enemies in the sense that when something bad happens, it's usually there's nothing to see here. There's no public education about what it's really like to be a police officer. Now, the downside of that is if you show people what it's really like to be a police officer, people won't join. But there has to be, I just think there needs to be more education about what police deal with. So there can be empathy from the people we serve as well. And that's one of the things I'm hoping to try and do with this. But I think police forces in general and police departments in general probably lack the foresight to do that over a very long period of time.
no, I agree. You're right, and I applaud you for doing this, and I hope it is just overwhelmingly successful, and that more people do podcasts because you can only serve X amount of people. But you're right, the stories need to be out there, and it's interesting how even just this interview is evolving, and the thought of the cool undercover stories, right, or whatever.
Yep.
The everyday cop, the stuff they see, those things need to be told, because
Yes.
um, and literally my first call, I graduated the academy on July 20th, 1999, and I got out of FTO, or no, I'm sorry, that's when I got out of FTO. My very first call that night, I worked midnights that night. we're 30 minutes into being in the car, and my trainer say, drive here, drive there, go look around, we'll see where this precinct's like. First radio call we got was a body in a Burger King parking lot. And so we get there, and this person had been run over in the parking lot like 7 or 8 times. And of
Jesus.
course, later we find out what the reason was. Um, but the person was laying there, and the head was swollen, and it was disfigured and discolored because of the blood pooling, the
Yep.
lividity. Um, we found out later that this was a cross-dresser male, if in a car full of guys driving around drinking beer and doing what they were doing, and they found out that she was a he. They threw him out of the car, ran him over, but they went and ran him over 5 or 6 more times to make sure that the job was done. That was
Yep.
my very first call as a police officer, and I'm just one guy in one city on one shift. That
Yeah.
insanity happens all the time, and that's the stuff that they didn't teach me that in the academy. There's no like, hey, you're going to see someone who's been run over 7 times because they're a cross dresser. Deal with it, kid. Um, yeah,
How
then you're
much
supposed to
more?
go home. And
Yeah, you're
go
right.
ahead.
You're supposed to go. You're supposed to go on with your job, or you're supposed to go home. Now, you were older, so you had seen a few things. What do you think the difference would have been if you were 20, 21, and that
You
was
know, I,
your first call?
obviously the maturity helps. The maturity in what to do or how to do and how to react. You know, I've seen young guys who haven't done so well, for things like that.
Yep.
Um, yeah, maturity obviously was big that night. But even be mature, right? So here I am, a kid who grows up in the suburbs of Omaha. No real crime, no issues.
Yep.
I had seen 3 or 4 bodies in my life, and it was all at a funeral. I had never seen a
Yep.
crime victim. I'd never seen someone murdered. Um, of course, they show you pictures in the academy, but that's a picture, and there's no
Yeah.
smells with the picture.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's hard, bringing in the 21-year-old, um, especially with no military training. They just don't have life training. But if that's who our recruits are, then that's who our recruits are, and we have to train them the best we can. You know,
No, very true. What's the most surprising thing you've learnt about yourself over your journey as a police officer?
I believe, I realized that I'm a much more compassionate person than I ever thought I was. Like I mentioned earlier about being the bleeding heart.
Yep.
You know, I found real compassion for human beings and the human struggle, and um, even the drug dealers that I arrested. They're most of them were addicts. To be
Yep.
honest, and I firmly believe in my heart that there isn't a single person in the world who is an addict that is truly down and out at their worst and wants to be an addict again tomorrow.
Yep.
They don't want to be an addict. They are from choices they've made, but they don't want to be addicted to methamphetamine or to heroin or to fentanyl or anything else. Um, but like I said, I found myself being much more compassionate, especially about halfway through my career,
Yep.
and I was okay with it. It's like, you know what, you're gonna call me a pussy because I'm compassionate. If you want to fight, let's go, bring it on. Um, I can be
We used to
compassionate as I
we used
want, at the same time
we used
also be deadly.
we used to call them Care Bears. Um,
Yeah, teddy bears. Yeah,
but I mean, it's a good point, and I think you're right. The whole you get to, especially doing the undercover stuff, you get to see people probably more at their worst than at their worst because you see them over a longer period of time doing stuff. And I always used to think, there for the grace of God and a wrong decision by me or a wrong choice by me, that could be me.
yeah. And you say you see them at their worst, but and you also see their true soul because
Yep.
they have no idea you're the cops. They're telling
Yep.
you their soul, and you're like, oh my god, you are so lost.
Yep.
this
Yeah.
is how
No,
you this is how you truly think. Oh man.
that's a whole nother conversation when it comes to drug enforcement, and I'm not going to go there. Um, what do you think? So there's two questions. What's the most important or crucial trait for someone to first be a police officer, and second for someone who's going to work undercover?
Well, to be a police officer in general, I think you just have to be a strong person, not necessarily physically, but you have to be a strong person in your soul and in your guiding light direction that you take in life. You have to be able to stand for things and stick to it. Because it's going to be tough. You're going to get punched in the mouth physically, and you're going to get punched in the mouth metaphorically, and you have to be able to stand for what you believe. And that's
Yep.
law and order. Um, as far as undercover, I think you better have a good base for who you are, not who the character is that you're playing. Because you're basically a character in a movie.
Yep.
You're a role player, and that's it. And you need to be able to turn that role player off as soon as it's over, when you go home.
So a
And
strong belief and identity in who you are, and an understanding that it is just a role. Do you think?
yes, it's just a role. I caught myself early on, when I wasn't very good at undercover. I live in the state, or I worked in the state of Nebraska, which is the river between the next state is Iowa. So the next state over, which
Yep.
I have no authority in whatsoever, is 5 miles from my police department. So, and I lived in Iowa. I would drive home, and I'd stop at a bar in Iowa and have two beer. I would always limit myself to two beers, but I was
Yep.
trying to drum up other undercover cases that weren't even in my jurisdiction. And I was so hell bent on I got to be this badass undercover guy and have hundreds of cases a year, and I was out of control. Thinking I needed to be in control doing these things, and I wasn't based in reality in my first couple of years. And
Yep.
that's also a big tangent of a story that I wasn't in control of life at the time. Um, I was doing too many things and trying to be too many people, and working 18 hours a day every day, and I was running downhill as fast as I could, and luckily I didn't trip and wipe out too badly. But that was also in that time frame of my first couple years of undercover, and luckily I kind of landed softly after my wife and my favorite partner at work, Edie, told me I better wake the hell up because I was turning into quite the jerk. So that's the other
Did you
good thing, I
accept
guess.
that? So I was going to
Oh
say,
yeah, I
did you
accepted
accept
it.
that
I
the
realized I
first time
was,
they told that?
yeah, I realized it was true.
Yeah.
Um, it was coming from two different angles, two of the people I trusted most in my life. Um, and I took a step back, and realized, yeah, this is a problem. Um, so that'd be the other second piece of that an officer needs. It isn't them; is they need a good support system, to keep them in line, keep them in check.
Yep. No, that's a big definite. And I think one of the things is you can have that. You also need to listen to it if
Yeah,
someone says something to you.
so I'm assuming you guys had some sort of handler, and since you did
Yep.
cases longer term, we didn't have a handler. We just had other guys on a job, and if I would have had a true handler in that undercover handler sense, they would have probably been noticed sooner than it was noticed that what I was kind of becoming.
Yep.
I didn't do anything illegal. I wasn't using drugs. I mean, nothing like that. I wasn't stepping on my wife. It just was. I turned into such a control freak because being on SWAT, you have to be in control.
Yep.
Being in narcotics, you got to be in control, and working undercover, you got to control everything. And there was no time where I wasn't trying to control every single aspect of the day, and it just started melting down on me, and which included going to bars outside of my even legal jurisdiction and trying to drum up
And
dope
trying to jump
cases.
work. Yeah. Um, just in regards to that, now that you've left and you've changed that, are you happy to not have control? Are you, or does it still sometimes burn? And go, you sort of go, it's a conscious battle.
Oh, I could lie to you and say it's easy, but my wife would come here and smack me and say you're full of it. I do much better, Jason, much better. And even when I fail, I will catch myself. Say, okay, hang on, just stop. This isn't
Yep.
yours. You don't have to run the whole thing. Um, yeah, so it's
Well,
much better. But like anything else, I don't think it ever is going to be 100% perfect.
but you're aware of it and you catch yourself. What would you say to someone who's going through that now?
I suppose I guess I would try to relate to them, where I was at, and how
Yep.
how destructive it can be. You can push people away, and hopefully they'll come back when you change, but maybe they won't. So, just to try to have some self awareness as to, are those some of your attributes as well.
Fair enough. All right, look, we've been going for an hour and 20. So, what I might do is I'll give you the last comment in regards to, firstly, if you can tell us where, again, your name of your book, where to get it, and a last comment in regards to, your life as a police officer.
Yeah. So, I mean, the book is my life as a police officer. That's why I wrote it. You can get it on Amazon.com. It's called Ram One ONE. Um, Again, that was my position on the SWAT team. But I basically wrote the book as to a memoir of my career, and that's from being involved in shootings to having I've had two partners killed in the line of duty, to working undercover, to working on the SWAT team. Explosives and craziness. I basically just told a story, and I was very stark in that sense. Where a lot of these things that I just told you, where they were self-deprecating, they're in the
Yep.
book. I didn't make myself out to be this hero. It's like, hey, here's the things that I screwed up and screwed up royally, and here's the life lessons I learned. Um, and again, also about the book is I'm bragging about the people that I worked with. Some of the great cases, like I mentioned Edie earlier. I mentioned some of these awesome cases that I was just a little piece of, but I got to be there to see some excellent police work. Whether that's on the narcotic side or whether that was in the SWAT world. Um, I feel utterly blessed that I got to do two of the most prized jobs I think in law enforcement, um, and I did them for a long time. And so, not a lot of people get that lucky to get to do exactly what they want for as long as I did. So it's like, you know what, I'm going to share the stories because I was a lucky guy.
And I think people should read them for no other reason to say thank you for what you've done and for that service. All right, what we might do is we might end up there. Um, I've been talking to Paul Milone. I got that right that time, didn't I?
Yeah.
Who is a former police officer from the Omaha Police in Nebraska. This is Behind the Thin Blue Line, the new name for the podcast where I'm going to have conversations with police officers about what they've done and how they have worked, and then if they're former, what they're doing after and how they want it. So if you're a current or former police officer and you want to share your stories, then please drop me a line at whisperintheshadowspodcast@gmail.com. Paul, thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it. Story's been fantastic. And again, that's Ram1. You can get that at amazon.com. Have a great evening for a Tuesday night, I think it is there. And to everyone else, thank you for joining us.
Jason, thank you so much for having me. Have a good
All right.
day.
Bye now.